civilization of love requires that we as Christians and Catholics address our relationship with money as well as who and how it is created. In truth, 98% of our world money supply is created by private banks when they issue loans. This debt money imposes significant interest costs on all of society and the natural environment. I have calculated the cost of interest payments to our economic lives of private debt money currently consumes roughly 35 to 50% of any nation's GDP. In the US alone, roughly 36 cents of every dollar spent by Americans will go to pay for interest on the total amount of outstanding and rising mountain of debt, now exceeding $60 trillion and unrepayable. The evidence is clear. Millions of people and our natural environment are suffering each day because of the burden debt money in the form of unnecessary interest as a consequence of accepting usury. The truth is that none of these interest costs would be necessary if the power to create money was returned to the people through governments who would create the necessary money ex nihilo. What does that mean? Latin, just kidding. It's not a test. To provide sufficiency of human material needs and to be better stewards of our environment. Why is it that we accept debt slavery? Why do we accept usury, the charging of interest on money, which Plato, Thomas Aquinas, and even John Maynard Keynes, the great economist, called the extraction of usury a misdemeanor against humanity? As a student of the money system and church teaching, I have learned that the Catholic Church, while historically forbidding the charging of interest on loans, went silent on the issue in the mid-19th century. It is time for new church ethical teachings on money, debt, and usury. I'm inviting you, Pope Francis, to lead with your moral authority a new teaching encyclical on money, debt, forgiveness, usury, and jubilee. A universal declaration of debt jubilee in the spirit of the words Jesus Christ gave us in the original Lord's Prayer. I believe the world is on the brink of a massive debt crisis that threatens to inflame the world in economic chaos, a crisis even larger than climate change. I would like to humbly offer my economic advisory services to your office and to the Vatican in union with the Archbishop of Edmonton to help prepare a new teaching, along with my good friend Professor Stefano Zamagna of Bologna, who sits on your Council for Peace and Justice, and who co-authored Caritas in Veritate with Pope Benedict. I pray that my book brings you heart great joy, inspires you to act with love for the well-being of all humanity. In the love of Jesus Christ, Mark. That was it. To date, I have had no response from the Pope or the Council of Justice and Peace. I'm not surprised. Kind of maybe ruffled some feathers. Maybe it didn't even get, maybe it was shredded before it even got to him. So as I said, I was supposed to have this near meeting with the Pope on the 20th of October at the last week of the Synod of the Family. I was invited by some friends who are working with Indigenous people, the Algonquin people of Quebec, our eastern province. The Algonquin people, like the Iroquois, the First Nations of Turtle Island. That's what North America was called. My mission was to join them to appeal to the Pope to acknowledge the cultural injustices imposed on the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. My goal was to find out whether Pope Francis indeed had received my book. My Indigenous friends represented the interests of the Algonquin Nation of Quebec and the Ottawa or Ottawa watershed. They were asking for an admission by Pope Francis and the Church of the existence of a document called the Doctrine of Discovery, that some believe gave permission to Cortes and Columbus to go subjugate Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. Some believe that the Fifth Church Age, which began in 1520 with Cortes, coming to the Aztec nation and taking their gold, is coming to an end. More importantly, I would learn that the expropriation of Turtle Island and the abundance of natural assets, along with a cultural genocide, was one of the greatest triumphs of the so-called money power, which still resides in the city of London, the ancient Londonium of Rome, the seat of world banking power and money power. What I've learned from working with Indigenous people in Canada, that they have a deep understanding of commonwealth that reminds me of Luca Pacioli's teachings, that all wealth comes from the Creator or God. These Indigenous people had no system of property rights. They had no formal form of money other than the use of a tiny seashell that came from the Maori from New Zealand, Ataroa. They used simple things to exchange like seashells, which the ancient Chinese indigenous people of Taiwan used to use. The expropriation of the natural assets of Turtle Island represents the greatest theft in human history, from a people who still remind us to be comfortable with the abundance of nature, that you can't eat money, and the tree of life still lives and calls us back to its abundant giving. For too long, we've been addicted to the tree of knowledge. Perhaps we are learning that there is no thing to do when the tree of life was sufficient for all our needs. Indigenous cultures remind us through their ceremonies of smudging, the use of sweet grass and sage, the peace pipe, the sun dance, the sweat lodge, which I've enjoyed. It's a near-death experience, believe me. It gets so hot. That when we give thanks and tribute to the Creator for all we have, then we have the chance to live a healthy economic life. I had many experiences with First Nation elders who reminded me that beginning with a thanks to the Creator for all that is gifted us, and then all meetings and relationships seem to operate more smoothly. Indigenous cultures teach us that our economic well-being cannot be separated from the natural environment. To do so is a sign of insanity. In essence, our villages and cities and environment are a common home. Indeed, the words economy and ecology share the same root, oikos, meaning household. My role with the Algonquin Nation wasn't just to appeal for this Doctrine of Discovery letter as if that would change anything, but in fact to appeal to the Pope with a new model. We call it the Earth Dollar. We created the Earth Dollar, a form of cryptocurrency like the Bitcoin, except unlike the Bitcoin, which is a mathematical algorithm, the Earth Dollar is tied directly to the ecological health of the Ottawa watershed. It is the watershed that is the originator of our money, or liquidity, notice the words. What if the watershed was a working model of genuine currency and the banks of the river are real banks? See the language? You see, money must be like water. It must flow, for if it is stored up behind dams and human hubris, it putrefies and becomes undrinkable. We weren't ready with our proposal yet to Pope Francis, nor were we ready to appeal to Cardinal Turkson of Ghana with our new model. But I do see the Earth Dollar as a form of financial justice for Indigenous people. I have the pleasure of working with them on these aspirations. And I believe it could become a working model for the implementation of Laudato Si. So Laudato Si, the beautiful encyclical, I probably won't spend that much time on it, even though I promised you. If anyone's read it, you know what it's about. But the important thing, it was inspired by St. Francis of Assisi. I spent time in Assisi myself on my own vision quest when I was 32, and I went to Jerusalem to get my calling to come back into the Temple of Economics. I wanted to be a monk or a priest. I was telling Rob, and Rob and I both aspire to going back in the monastery. Why is that? Because maybe we can get more stuff done when we're quiet. We're chatting so much. So what did St. Francis teach us? I believe St. Francis is undoubtedly the patron saint of the environment and would be a champion for an ecological civilization and ecological justice. St. Francis was a model on how to love for all of creation. He had a relationship with nature, with birds and flowers, animals and land. Having rejected the monetary and wealth of his aristocratic father, Francis espoused an ethic of right relationship with God and with nature. His canticle to the sun was a perfect reminder to us that we all are called to a harmonious and joyful relationship with nature, that a healthy environment is an extension of God's love. Okay, here's when I get a little punchy. The Pope needs to go further. While I'm encouraged by the Pope's encyclical, I feel he has not gone far enough in locating one of the key sources of our ecological crisis. I believe the source of our complex relationship with money and material things is at the heart of this. In the wealthier nations, we see a pandemic of fear about money, either not having enough or having too much. We seem addicted to feeding our wants, even though most of our needs have been satisfied. We have, as Pope John Paul II said in 2003, come under a spell of consumerism and materialism. Pope John Paul II challenged the world to go beyond this obsession, this idolatry with the market. John Paul II, I think, would agree with our vision for an ecological civilization. For a true civilization of love is, in my mind, the ultimate frontier. My main concern with the teachings of Pope Francis is that he fails to address a fundamental driver of our economic systems, as I've said, that this debt-based system is the fundamental component of our GDP now, and will grow so large, like cancer, it will consume the host. That's what will eventually happen. It is remarkable when you look back at the debt statistics of the United States that the debt mountain has doubled roughly every 7 years. Well, anyone who's been studying Jubilee knows what I'm talking about. In another 7 years, so currently the debt sits around $60 trillion. If you include Medicare and all those other costs, it's $122 trillion. There's some great imagery on the internet. You can see how much $100 bills stack up to. In 7 years, the U.S. debt will have reached $120 trillion. The interest payments on the national debt, I believe, now exceed the expenditures on the U.S. military. Some say that was the end of Rome. Even now, the U.S. debt imposes on each citizen 35 cents of interest costs on every dollar we spend. That means that the average American will work a third of their life just paying for the interest payments on the collective debt of the nation. What most don't realize is that this is completely unnecessary, as money could be created without debt and without the interest burden if governments assume the responsibility, as Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln understood. But where are these debates today in your presidential election? Can you imagine if you had 30 to 50% more of your daily work freed up because you didn't have to work for interest? What would you do with that time? Maybe we'd be really irresponsible. Maybe our kids would be really irresponsible. I'm not sure. The pressures on all of humanity and the injustice imposed by the acceptance of usury would end in a flash. Greenhouse gas emissions would plummet as less oil and gas would be necessary to fuel debt repayments. We'd have more time to spend with our aging parents, more quality time with our kids. Mortgages would be dead. No longer would couples have to pay 2.5 times the value of their home, but only would pay the principal. We would quickly remove a significant amount of carbon embedded in the interest costs in our economy, freeing up human energy, providing new and discretionary human capacities to rapidly increase renewable energy capacity, retool our economy to achieve the goals of an ecological civilization, and possibly a civilization of love. Stepping on the dragon's tail. Pope Francis has not yet entered the thorny issue of monetary policy and the nature of money, though he has made some bold statements calling the love of money the dung of the devil, in reference to a 4th century bishop. So this has been with us for a long time. He has thus far not provoked the sleeping dragon of the money power, as Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson did. Lincoln referred to the money power as a den of vipers. And Thomas Jefferson said private banks and their power are more dangerous than standing armies. They're not my words. What did Donald Trump think? Stepping on the dragon's tail won't be easy, and it will unleash a roar from the money power. Thank goodness we have the model of Mary, the mother of Jesus, as our example of a woman who will crush the head of the serpent. At least that's what we're told if you read Genesis. Mary is our model. Why? Because it is her fiat that changes everything. The word fiat means yes. It was her fiat to the angel Gabriel that changed everything. And guess what we call money? Fiat. I think it's time to change the counterfeit to a real fiat. When will this nightmare end? When will this debt nightmare end? Who will be our economic savior? Who will be the Luke Skywalker, the Harry Potter, the Frodo, the Samwise, or Neo? Perhaps the debt system will collapse on itself, choking on its own hubris and greed. Perhaps the money matrix will begin to fragment on its own, perhaps pushed by a young rogue Wall Street trader who knows the injustice of the system he or she is part of and feels a call from the Holy Spirit to end the slavery of debt tonight. No one can say how the debt slavery system will end, but make no mistakes, we're debt slaves, and we don't even know it, unlike the Israelites and Moses. I am under no illusion that one man, Pope Francis or any pope, could issue a new canon law or another encyclical that would compel bankers in London and New York to turn into a Mother Teresa, forgiving all debts and a global debt jubilee by resetting our ticking debt time bomb to zero. Pope Francis has spoken out against the dark side of capitalism and the love of money. He said in Bolivia in July, "Behind all this pain, death, and destruction, there is a sketch of what Basil of Caesarea called the dung of the devil. An unfettered pursuit of money rules. The service of the common good is left behind. Once capital becomes an idol and guides people's decisions, once greed for money presides over the entire socioeconomic system, it ruins society, it condemns and enslaves men and women." Oh, good, he used the word woman. "And destroys human fraternity. It sets people against one another, as we clearly see. It even puts at risk our common home." Peter's going to love this. Okay, now we get into the hopeful. That was pretty dark, right? Okay, everyone wait. Okay, we're gonna have a Henry Ford once said, if people just knew how the banks create money, there'd be a revolution tonight. Well, there won't be a revolution in America, so. Solutions are in our neighborhoods. I'm compelled by the efforts of ordinary friends and neighbors who are beginning to examine their own relationship with money. We're beginning to meet as Christians and Catholics and Muslims and others to talk about our strange relationship with money. Thank you to Peter and the Economics and Compassion. People are doing that in Cincinnati, and it's happening. There's this kind of slow groundswell, maybe not making the media, but something's happening. We're beginning to build circles to explore the possibility of creating interest-free trusts, credit unions, and even banks where interest charges are no longer required. I studied one of these in Stockholm, Sweden, called a Yacht Bank, where they don't charge interest on principle because they say we reject usury. And it was designed by engineers, not economists, because engineers at least understand flow. And why? Because we will begin to renew our trust with each other. We'll start to talk about money like it's the weather, things that we're told not to talk about. We're already giving without expectation of a return on our money. Things like Kiva, where $25 goes a long way, to Banana Cooperative, a few women in Ghana. We're forming lending circles. We're opening discussions about credit card debt forgiveness, and perhaps we'll have the courage to help our neighbors be free of that 18 to 24% annual interest charge with a generous 2% neighbor line of genuine credit. We're learning to become more financially literate and more responsible with our money. We are relearning to live within our means and reject the lure of easy credit and the addiction of material things. We're learning that when we are free of debts, we have more discretionary time to spend in doing the things God created us to do, endowed with the gifts that will become increasingly self-evident, as per the words of the Declaration of Independence. We're learning about the abundance and often idle assets that live in our neighborhoods. These idle assets include that pickup truck that everyone on the block might borrow from Joe, or Mary, who has the gift of healing through her practice of Reiki, or perhaps the 15-year-old Amanda who has some free time when she is no longer hooked to her technology to spend time with 85-year-old Angela, an elder who has stories of her past that can inspire Amanda and her peers. These are the idle assets in our community, in our neighborhoods. They don't need money to get an economy of community and compassion to flourish. This is something we can start tomorrow, and we are pursuing in Edmonton, inspired by the work of my elders, Peter Block, John McKnight, and Walter Brueggemann. How do we leave Pharaoh's Egypt? Walter Brueggemann's made some amazing reflections. Are we not like, right, a modern, Jewish people that I think, what a crazy idea that this Moses, who was that right-hand guy of the Pharaoh, decides one day God knocks on him and he says, lead my people set my people free. All right, where are we going? We're gonna go over there somewhere in the Sinai. Well, got to cross that big body of water. Are you crazy? What kind of crazy man does that? But I think we're kind of in the same situation. But the worst part is we don't even know we're slaves. At least the Jews knew they had chains or something. They were bound to labor. How are we going to do this? Buckminster Fuller once said that to change the existing system, one must design a more compelling parallel operating system. This was also the lesson of Sun Tzu, who gave us the art of war, who said, the way to change your enemy is to compel them that your ideas are more compelling than theirs. That's how you win a war. Leaving the modern version of Egypt and Pharaoh's debt slavery won't be easy. It must have been difficult for Moses to compel the fellow Jews to leave the comforts of Egypt, albeit enslaved, and attempt to cross the chasm of the Red Sea, to enter the Sinai desert, only for most of them to die, never reaching the promised land. Yet God showered them with love and the abundance of manna that fell from the skies that became corruptible at night. The Israelites were completely dependent on God's grace and mercy. Of course, they were tempted to slip back into the comforts of Egypt by building a new golden calf, their icon of the money power, but Moses persisted. Are we not like Moses and the Israelites of old? Or are we worse off because we don't realize we're slave in a system like Neo in the Matrix? If you don't know you're a slave, why would you listen to a crazy economist like me who's compelling others to walk away from the system of usury and build a new, more compelling operating system? How can we cross the Red Sea of debt? What will we eat? What will we do with all that extra discretionary time? Will we be prone to the temptation of sloth and laziness? Perhaps we can't expect a Hail Mary from Pope Francis. But here, in this time of extreme unction and challenges, God gave Moses 10 commandments and economic laws, the cornerstones for an economy of love and compassion. God told Moses about how to deal with money, to pause every 7 days to give thanks to God, to forgive debts every 7 years, and to redistribute wealth every 7 times 7 years, or 49 years. Notice those lovely sevens, something called the Jubilee. The only beef I have with the story of Moses, I don't believe God would now distinguish between charging interest on Gentiles and not to Jews. I think Jesus gave us the commandment we all need to remember, to love God and neighbor as oneself. This love means that we cannot become addicted to the love of money, lest we forgo living the most important of all the commandments. My final appeal is to theologians. We're the voices of our Catholic theologians, including those here at Xavier University, who are speaking out against the injustice of that money and usury, and reminding us of the words of Jesus in the Lord's Prayer. How can we stand today with the Blessed Virgin Mary, who showed us how to humble ourselves before God and give our fiat as she did, serving God to love and to help bring upon the world a civilization of love? How can we build neighborhoods and economies of compassion like some here in Cincinnati are doing? We have a responsibility to right this injustice, to return the power of money to the people, to review and end the practice of usury and bring back the old teachings of Aristotle and Aquinas, and even economist John Maynard Keynes, The fact that the money system is not part of the current presidential candidate debate is telling. It was a key feature of the presidential debate in 1900 when William Jennings